My son Marcus shoved me out of his car on Highway 92, screaming, "Walk home, old-timer," as rain began to fall. While I stood there soaking wet, watching his taillights disappear into the storm, I pulled out my phone and did something that would change everything. Because what he didn't know was that I had just become the most important witness to something that would make him beg for my forgiveness. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The collection notice crumpled in my weathered hands as I stared at the red letters demanding immediate payment. $1,500 for my heart medication alone this month. At 73, I had learned that pride doesn't pay medical bills, but asking for help had never come easily to me. The morning sun cast long shadows through the kitchen window of my small apartment, highlighting every crack in the linoleum floor that reminded me how far my circumstances had fallen since retirement. The phone rang with that jarring electronic tone that seemed louder every year. Marcus's name appeared on the caller ID, which surprised me since my son rarely called before his lunch break. Usually our conversations were brief affairs, squeezed between his real estate appointments and whatever social obligations filled his busy schedule. "Dad, I need you to come with me somewhere today." His voice carried an unusual urgency that immediately put me on alert. "It's important business and I could use your input." I set down the collection notice, studying my reflection in the chrome surface of the coffee pot. What kind of business required a retired mechanic's input? Marcus had made it clear over the years that my working-class background didn't align with his professional aspirations. He preferred to keep our worlds separate, introducing me to his colleagues only when absolutely necessary. "What sort of business, son?" I asked, noting the traffic sounds in the background that suggested he was already driving somewhere. "Real estate deal. Big one. The kind that could solve both our problems if we handle it right." His words carried a weight that made my chest tighten with familiar anxiety. Marcus had been dropping hints about my financial struggles lately, asking pointed questions about my rent payments and medical expenses with a casualness that felt rehearsed. "I'm not sure I follow. What problems are we talking about?" "Dad, just trust me on this. Meet me at the Chevron station on Maple Street in 20 minutes. Wear something nice, not those old work shirts." The line went quiet except for the hum of his engine. This could be the answer we've been looking for. After he hung up, I stood holding the silent phone, trying to decode the conversation that felt more like a summons than an invitation. Marcus had been different these past few months, more attentive to my circumstances, but in a calculating way that reminded me of his mother when she was planning something I wouldn't like. Elena had been gone 3 years now, but I recognized her strategic thinking in our son's recent behavior. I walked to my bedroom closet, pushing past the work shirts Marcus had criticized to find the navy blazer Elena had bought me for her company Christmas parties. The fabric still held the faint scent of her perfume, a detail that made me pause with unexpected grief. She would have known exactly what Marcus was planning. Elena always could read our son better than I could, seeing through his charm to the calculations underneath. The drive to the Chevron station took 12 minutes through neighborhoods that had been gentrifying around me for the past decade. Houses I remembered as modest family homes now sported fresh paint, manicured gardens, and luxury cars in the driveways. Progress, Marcus called it when he visited, though I heard something else in his voice when he talked about property values and development opportunities. Marcus stood beside his black BMW, checking his phone with the impatient energy I remembered from his childhood when he wanted something badly. At 42, he had inherited Elena's sharp features and strategic mind, but none of my patience or contentment with simple pleasures. Success in real estate had given him confidence that sometimes bordered on arrogance, especially when dealing with people he considered less sophisticated. "Dad, thanks for coming." He clapped me on the shoulder with practiced enthusiasm. "You look good, professional." His eyes appraised my appearance like he was evaluating property, noting details that might need improvement. "Hop in, we've got about 30 minutes to get there." I settled into the passenger seat, inhaling the scent of leather and expensive cologne that defined Marcus's world. The BMW's interior felt like a cocoon of success, all polished surfaces and digital displays that reminded me how different our lives had become. Through the windshield, I watched familiar streets give way to unfamiliar territory as Marcus navigated toward the wealthy side of town. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked, noting how his jaw tensed when I spoke. "Potential investor wants to meet you. Someone with serious money looking for the right opportunity." Marcus glanced at me sideways, his expression unreadable. "Your input could make the difference between a small deal and something that changes everything." The explanation felt incomplete, raising more questions than it answered. What kind of investor needed to meet a retired mechanic? What input could I possibly provide that Marcus couldn't handle himself? I had learned over the years that direct questions often made Marcus defensive, so I settled back and watched the scenery change from working-class neighborhoods to executive developments. We pulled into the parking lot of the Grand View Country Club, a place I had driven past countless times but never entered. The building sprawled across perfectly manicured grounds. Its architecture suggested old money and exclusive membership. Luxury cars filled the parking spaces, each one worth more than I had earned in my best years at the garage. "Dad, I don't belong in a place like this," I said quietly, understanding suddenly why he had insisted on my blazer instead of work clothes. "Dad, that's exactly the attitude we need to change." His voice carried a sharp edge I had heard him use with difficult clients. "This is about opportunity, about finally getting ahead instead of just getting by." He turned to face me directly, his expression intense. "Do you want to spend the rest of your life worrying about medical bills and rent payments?"
The question hit like a physical blow because the answer was obviously no. The collection notices, the careful budgeting, the constant anxiety about unexpected expenses had worn me down more than I cared to admit. But something about Marcus's tone suggested this opportunity came with strings I couldn't see yet. "What exactly are you asking me to do, son?" "Just be yourself. Answer their questions honestly. Let them see that you're a decent man who's worked hard his whole life and deserves better than struggling to survive." Marcus's words sounded rehearsed, like he had practiced this conversation. Sometimes investors need to understand the human element of a deal. We walked toward the country club entrance, my work boots feeling out of place on the pristine walkway. Marcus moved with the confidence of someone who belonged in these surroundings, greeting the doorman by name and navigating toward a private dining room without hesitation. The walls displayed oil paintings of hunting scenes and founding members, their faces stern with the authority that came from inherited wealth. 3 people waited at a corner table that offered privacy from other diners. 2 men in expensive suits flanked a woman whose jewelry caught the light with every gesture. Their clothes, their posture, their casual confidence marked them as the kind of people who made money decisions that affected entire communities. I felt like an imposter in my borrowed blazer and 20-year-old dress shoes. "This is my father, Franklin Cooper," Marcus announced, with pride that sounded genuine. "Dad, meet the investment group I've been telling you about." The introductions blurred together in a haze of firm handshakes and business cards with impressive titles. Patricia Hendricks, Senior Portfolio Manager; David Chen, Acquisitions Director; Robert Martinez, Development Coordinator. Their names meant nothing to me, but the way Marcus deferred to their questions suggested they held significant power over whatever opportunity had brought us here. "Mr. Cooper, your son speaks very highly of you," Patricia began, her voice carrying the polished warmth of someone skilled in managing people. "He tells us you're facing some challenging circumstances that might benefit from the right partnership." I glanced at Marcus, wondering exactly what personal details he had shared with these strangers. The collection notices, the medical bills, the careful calculations that govern my daily life had apparently become selling points in some larger strategy I didn't understand yet. "I'm managing fine," I replied carefully, unwilling to display my vulnerabilities to people whose motives remained unclear. "Of course you are," David interjected smoothly, "but managing and thriving are different things entirely. We're here because we believe in creating opportunities for good people to improve their situations." The conversation continued with the kind of vague language that revealed nothing while sounding impressive. Investment opportunities, strategic partnerships, mutual benefits that would solve everyone's problems. I answered their questions about my work history, my current living situation, my relationship with Marcus, all while feeling like a specimen being examined under a microscope. Marcus participated with an enthusiasm that made me increasingly uncomfortable. He knew details about my finances that I had never shared with him, speaking about my rent payments and medical expenses with casual familiarity that suggested recent research. When had my son started monitoring my personal business so closely? "The beauty of this arrangement," Robert explained as dessert arrived, "is that everyone benefits. You get financial security, we get a reliable partner, and Marcus facilitates a deal that advances his career significantly." The pieces began clicking together with sickening clarity. This wasn't about my input or expertise. This was about me as an asset in some scheme Marcus had developed to advance his own interests. The medical bills and financial struggles he had been so concerned about weren't problems to solve, but leverage to use. "What exactly would this partnership require from me?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Patricia and David exchanged glances before Patricia answered. "We'd need you to serve as the primary applicant for a substantial loan. Your work history and community ties make you an ideal candidate for certain programs designed to help long-time residents invest in neighborhood development." The euphemisms couldn't disguise what they were really asking. They wanted to use my name and reputation to secure financing for their projects, probably taking advantage of programs designed to help people like me while ensuring the profits flowed to people like them. Marcus would get his commission for bringing them a compliant partner, while I would carry the legal responsibility for whatever followed. "I need to think about this," I said quietly, reaching for my water glass to buy time while my mind raced through implications. "Of course," David replied with practiced understanding. "These decisions shouldn't be rushed. But I should mention that timing is somewhat critical. The programs we're discussing have limited windows, and other candidates are being considered." The pressure felt subtle, but unmistakable. Accept quickly or lose the opportunity forever. I'd heard similar pitches from salesmen over the years, the artificial urgency designed to prevent careful consideration of terms and consequences. But this felt more dangerous because Marcus was invested in my compliance. "Marcus, could we have a moment to discuss this privately?" I asked, noting how his expression tightened at the request. "Dad, these are busy people. We shouldn't waste their time with family discussions we could have later." His voice carried a warning that reminded me of Elena when she was trying to control conversations that might not go her way. "I insist," I replied firmly, using the tone that had worked when Marcus was a teenager testing boundaries. We stepped onto the country club's terrace, overlooking golf course greens that stretched toward distant hills. The afternoon sun felt warm on my face, a contrast to the chill I felt about the conversation we had just left. Marcus paced beside the railing, his agitation visible in every gesture. "Dad, this is exactly the kind of opportunity that could change everything for both of us. You've been struggling with medical bills, rent payments, all the expenses that come with getting older. This solves those problems permanently. By putting my name on loans I don't understand for projects I have no control over?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I kept my voice level, but my patience was wearing thin. "Marcus, what happens if these investments don't work out the way they're promising?" "They're professionals, Dad. They know what they're doing."
His dismissal felt condescending, as if my concerns were evidence of small-minded thinking rather than legitimate caution. Sometimes you have to trust people who understand money better than you do. The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to be effective. I didn't understand investment strategies or development financing, but I understood enough about human nature to recognize when someone was trying to manipulate me, even if that someone was my own son. "What's your role in all this, Marcus? What do you get out of bringing them a willing participant?" His hesitation lasted only a second, but it was enough to confirm my suspicions. "I get a finder's fee for identifying qualified candidates. It's standard business practice." "How much?" "That's not important. What's important is that we're both benefiting from this arrangement." Marcus turned to face me directly, his expression serious. "Dad, I know you're proud and independent, but pride doesn't pay for heart medication. Independence doesn't prevent financial emergencies from destroying what little security you have left." The words hit their intended target because they were true. Pride and independence were luxuries I couldn't always afford at 73. But accepting help that came with hidden costs and unstated obligations felt more dangerous than struggling with bills I understood. "I need more time to consider this," I said finally, "and I want to review any documents before signing anything." Marcus's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing frustration that bordered on anger. "Dad, opportunities like this don't wait for people who can't make decisions. If you're not interested, they'll find someone who is. Then let them find someone else." We returned to the dining room, where Patricia, David, and Robert waited with expressions of polite expectation. I thanked them for their time and interest, explaining that I needed to review the opportunity more carefully before making any commitments. Their disappointment was professional but unmistakable, the kind of reaction that suggested they had expected easier compliance. The drive back toward my neighborhood passed in uncomfortable silence. Marcus gripped the steering wheel with visible tension, checking his phone at red lights with increasing agitation. I watched familiar landmarks appear through the passenger window, feeling relieved to be returning to surroundings I understood and people who weren't trying to use me for purposes I couldn't see. "You're making a mistake, Dad," Marcus said finally, as we approached the Chevron station where his car waited. "These people don't offer opportunities to just anyone. The financial security they're providing could set you up for the rest of your life." "At what cost, son? What happens to me if their investments fail and I'm left holding loans I can't repay?" "That's not going to happen. They're professionals with proven track records." His voice carried the frustrated patience of someone explaining simple concepts to a child. "Sometimes you have to trust people who know more than you do about complex financial matters." I studied my son's profile as he navigated through afternoon traffic, noting the tension in his jaw and the way his eyes avoided meeting me directly. When had Marcus become someone who saw his father as a resource to be managed rather than a person to be respected? The answer probably lay in the years since Elena's death, when grief and financial pressure had gradually changed both of us in ways we hadn't recognized. "Marcus, I appreciate that you're trying to help, but this doesn't feel right to me," I said as gently as I could manage. "Maybe there are other ways to address my financial situation that don't involve complicated partnerships with people I don't know." His explosion of frustration filled the car like a physical force. "Other ways? Dad, you're 73 years old with a heart condition and no savings. What other ways are you talking about? Working part-time at minimum wage? Applying for charity programs that treat you like a beggar?" The cruelty in his words shocked me more than their accuracy. Marcus had inherited his mother's strategic mind, but Elena's calculations had always been tempered by genuine love for family. This felt different, colder, more focused on outcomes than relationships. "I've managed to take care of myself for 73 years without compromising my principles," I replied quietly. "I'm not ready to start now." "Your principles?" Marcus pulled into the Chevron station with unnecessary force, stopping the BMW beside my old Honda with a gesture that emphasized the gap between our circumstances. His success in real estate had provided luxury and security, while my retirement had brought careful budgeting and constant worry about unexpected expenses. "Dad, wait." Marcus's voice stopped me before I could reach my car door. "I need you to understand something. The people we met today, they don't make offers like this to just anyone. If you turn this down, there won't be another opportunity like it." I turned to face him through his open window, noting the desperation that had crept into his expression. "Son, why is this so important to you? What aren't you telling me about your involvement with these people?" "It's not about me. It's about you having security and dignity in your final years instead of struggling with bills and worrying about medical emergencies." His answer came too quickly, rehearsed in a way that suggested he had been preparing for this question. "Marcus, if this opportunity is as good as you claim, why do they need me specifically? Why can't you qualify for these programs yourself?" The question hung between us while he searched for an answer that would sound convincing. I could see him calculating responses, weighing what would be most persuasive versus what would be most honest. The fact that honesty required such consideration told me everything I needed to know about the situation. "The programs are designed for people with certain demographic profiles," he said finally. "Age, income level, community ties. You qualify for assistance that someone in my position wouldn't be eligible for." The explanation felt incomplete, but I was too tired to push for details that would only confirm what I already suspected. Marcus was trying to use my circumstances to gain access to programs and opportunities that were meant to help people like me, not people like him. The finder's fee he would earn was probably substantial enough to motivate considerable effort in securing my cooperation. "I'm going home, son. Thank you for thinking of me, but this isn't the right solution for my problems." I walked to my Honda and started the engine, noting how Marcus remained in the parking lot watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Disappointment, certainly, but something else that looked almost like panic. As I pulled onto Maple Street, heading toward my neighborhood, I glanced in the rearview mirror to see him talking animatedly on his phone, probably reporting the failed meeting to someone who wouldn't be happy about the outcome. The drive home took me through areas where I had lived and worked for most of my adult life. Elena and I had raised Marcus in a modest house just 6 blocks from where I now rented a small apartment. The neighborhood had changed over the years, but slowly enough that I could still recognize the bones of the community that had shaped our family. These streets held memories of birthday parties, school events, neighborhood barbecues, and the simple pleasures of raising a child with someone you loved. What had happened to that child? When had Marcus become someone who saw his father's struggles as opportunities to exploit, rather than problems to solve with genuine care? The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but the gradual changes had been easy to overlook until today's conversation forced me to see them clearly. I parked in my assigned space behind the apartment building, noting Mrs. Patterson watering plants on her balcony and Mr. Rodriguez washing his truck in the covered parking area. Normal activities by normal people living normal lives without complicated investment schemes or strategic partnerships. The simplicity felt refreshing after an afternoon of polished manipulation disguised as opportunity. My apartment welcomed me with familiar smells and comfortable disorder. The collection notices still sat on the kitchen table where I had left them, but they felt less threatening now than Marcus's solution had felt this afternoon. Bills were problems with straightforward solutions, even if those solutions required sacrifice and careful planning. What Marcus had proposed felt like trading temporary relief for permanent vulnerability to forces I couldn't control or understand. I made coffee and settled into Elena's favorite chair, a threadbare recliner that we had bought during our first year of marriage. She had spent countless evenings in this chair, reading magazines or watching television while I worked on crossword puzzles at the kitchen table. The ritual had become one of our simple pleasures, the kind of easy companionship that sustained long marriages through good years and difficult ones. What would Elena think about today's events? She had always been protective of Marcus, defending his ambitions even when they seemed to conflict with family loyalty. But she had also been fiercely protective of our independence, suspicious of anyone who offered solutions that seemed too good to be true. Her voice in my memory warned against trusting people whose motives remain unclear, no matter how professional their presentation might be.
The phone rang as evening shadows began filling the apartment. Marcus's name on the caller ID made me hesitate before answering, uncertain whether I wanted to continue the conversation that had started this afternoon. "Dad, I've been thinking about our talk today. Maybe I didn't explain the opportunity clearly enough. Would you be willing to meet with them again tomorrow? Just to ask more questions and make sure you understand all the benefits." "Marcus, I thought I made my position clear. This isn't something I'm comfortable pursuing." "But Dad, you didn't really give it a fair consideration. You made up your mind before you understood what they were offering." His frustration leaked through despite obvious efforts to stay calm. "These people are willing to solve your financial problems permanently. How can you dismiss that without at least exploring the details?" The pressure felt relentless, like water wearing away stone through constant application. I recognized the technique from sales training programs Marcus probably attended, the persistent return to benefits while minimizing concerns that potential customers might raise. But I wasn't a customer. I was his father, and being treated like a sales prospect felt deeply wrong. "Son, I understand you think this would help me, but I need you to respect my decision. This isn't the right answer for my situation. What if I told you that turning this down could affect more than just your financial security?" The threat was subtle but unmistakable, delivered with the kind of calm precision that made it more frightening than shouted anger would have been. "What do you mean by that, Marcus?"
I'm trying to protect you from making a decision you'll regret. Dad, these aren't the kind of people you want to have negative feelings towards you. They remember who cooperates and who doesn't. The mask of concern slipped just enough to reveal something calculating underneath, a willingness to use fear as motivation that shocked me. "Marcus, I think we should end this conversation before one of us says something that damages our relationship permanently." "Our relationship?" His laugh sounded bitter, almost cruel. "Dad, our relationship is already damaged by your stubborn pride and inability to accept help when it's offered. I'm trying to save you from yourself, but you're too proud to see it." I hung up the phone with hands that shook slightly, understanding finally that the son I had raised with love and patience had become someone I barely recognized. The conversation felt like a betrayal that went beyond today's failed business meeting, revealing years of growing resentment and calculation that I had been too blind or too hopeful to acknowledge. The evening passed slowly, punctuated by text messages from Marcus that grew increasingly urgent as hours passed without response. Each message revealed more desperation and less concern for my actual well-being, focusing instead on missed opportunities and consequences for non-cooperation. I turned off my phone eventually, needing silence to process what I had learned about my son and what it meant for our future relationship. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams of Elena warning me about people who offered solutions that were too good to be true. In the dreams, she sat in her favorite chair, telling me to trust my instincts about Marcus's partners, to protect myself from schemes that would benefit everyone except the person taking the risks. I woke several times, comforted by her imagined voice, but frightened by the reality it was trying to help me navigate. Morning brought another call from Marcus, this one delivered with artificial cheerfulness that felt more threatening than yesterday's open frustration. He had scheduled another meeting with the investment group, claiming they had additional information that would address my concerns. The meeting was set for this afternoon, and he would pick me up at noon whether I agreed or not. "Marcus, I already told you I'm not interested in pursuing this opportunity," I said firmly, though my hands were shaking as I held the phone. "Dad, you don't have a choice anymore. These people don't make offers that get declined without consequences. They're expecting to see you this afternoon, and disappointing them would be very bad for both of us." The threat was open now, delivered without pretense of concern for my well-being. "What kind of consequences are you talking about?" "The kind that affect your housing situation, your credit rating, your ability to get medical care when you need it. Dad, these people have influence in areas you don't understand. Cooperating is the only smart choice at this point." His voice carried a coldness that made me wonder if I had ever really known my son at all.
I hung up the phone and sat staring at the collection notices that had started this nightmare. Medical bills and rent payments seemed like manageable problems compared to whatever Marcus had gotten himself and me involved with. The people he called investors were starting to sound more like criminals, and my son was starting to sound like someone who had crossed lines he couldn't uncross. The morning dragged past with increasing anxiety as noon approached. I considered calling the police, but what would I report? My son wanting me to attend a business meeting? The threats had been subtle enough to deny, and Marcus was skilled at presenting himself as a concerned child trying to help his struggling father. Who would believe that the real threat came from his desire to help rather than any criminal intent? At 11:30, I heard a car door slam in the parking lot. Through my front window, I could see Marcus walking toward my building with the determined stride of someone who had moved beyond asking permission to demanding compliance. His expression looked grim, focused on achieving objectives that no longer included my comfort or consent. The knock on my door came with authority that left no doubt about his mood. When I opened it, Marcus pushed past me into the apartment without invitation, his eyes scanning the space like he was conducting an inventory rather than visiting his father. "Dad, we need to leave in 5 minutes. I told them we'd be there by 12:30, and being late would send the wrong message about your commitment to this partnership." He spoke like the decision had already been made, requiring only my physical compliance rather than my agreement. "Marcus, I'm not going anywhere with you. This has gone too far, and I want you to leave my apartment now." I tried to sound firm, but my voice betrayed the fear that was growing stronger with each interaction. "Dad, you're being ridiculous. These are professional people offering you a legitimate business opportunity. Your paranoia is preventing you from seeing the benefits of cooperation." His words carried the patient tone of someone explaining simple concepts to a confused child, but his body language suggested he was prepared to use physical force if persuasion failed. "Get out of my apartment, Marcus. We can discuss this later when you're thinking more clearly." Instead of leaving, he moved closer, using his height and weight advantage to intimidate. At 42, Marcus was still strong from his gym memberships and active lifestyle, while I had grown frailer in the years since Elena's death. The physical imbalance made his presence feel threatening in a way I had never experienced from my own son. "Dad, you're coming with me, whether you want to or not. This isn't a request anymore." He grabbed my arm with enough force to leave bruises, pulling me toward the door despite my protests. "You can walk to the car voluntarily, or I can carry you. Either way, you're keeping this appointment." I tried to resist, but 73-year-old muscles were no match for his determination. He dragged me through the apartment, grabbing my jacket from the closet and my keys from the kitchen counter like he was collecting property rather than helping his father prepare for an outing. The casual violence of his actions shocked me more than the physical discomfort, revealing someone who had moved completely beyond normal family boundaries. "Marcus, stop this right now. You're hurting me." My plea seemed to have no effect on his behavior, suggesting he had crossed some psychological line where my well-being became secondary to achieving his objectives. "I'm trying to save you from yourself, Dad. Sometimes that requires doing things you don't understand or appreciate until later." He forced me through the front door and down the stairs toward his waiting BMW, ignoring my struggles and the attention we were attracting from neighbors. Mrs. Patterson stood on her balcony watching the scene with obvious concern, but she was too elderly and frail to intervene effectively.
Mr. Rodriguez looked up from washing his truck, his expression suggesting he was trying to decide whether this constituted a family dispute or something more serious that required outside help. "Help me!" I called toward Mr. Rodriguez, hoping someone would recognize that this situation had moved beyond normal family disagreement into something dangerous. "Mind your own business," Marcus shouted without looking back, his grip on my arm tightening painfully. "This is a family matter that doesn't concern you." He shoved me into the passenger seat of his BMW and slammed the door, moving quickly to the driver's side before I could escape. The electronic locks prevented me from opening the door anyway, and Marcus watched me constantly for signs of attempted escape. I was trapped in a moving prison, controlled by someone who claimed to love me while demonstrating complete disregard for my autonomy or well-being. Marcus, what happened to you? When did you become someone who would threaten and coerce his own father? The question came from genuine bewilderment rather than accusation, though I suspected he would hear it as criticism regardless of my intent. I became someone who's willing to do what's necessary to protect the people I care about, even when they're too stubborn to protect themselves. His answer revealed a twisted logic that transformed selfish motivation into noble sacrifice, making him the hero of a story where I was too confused to recognize salvation when it was offered. We pulled into the country club parking lot, where the same luxury cars waited in the same perfect rows. The setting looked peaceful and professional, giving no hint of the coercion that had brought me here, or the fear that was making my hands shake as Marcus turned off the engine. "Dad, we're going to walk in there like reasonable people discussing reasonable opportunities. You're going to listen to what they have to say, ask appropriate questions, and sign the documents they've prepared for your benefit." His instructions carried the tone of someone briefing an employee rather than consulting with family. "Any behavior that embarrasses me or insults them will have consequences you won't enjoy." What kind of consequences? The kind that affect where you live, what medical care you can afford, and whether you maintain the independence you seem to value so much. The threats were specific enough to be frightening, while remaining vague enough to deny if questioned by outside authorities. We walked through the country club entrance with Marcus's hand firmly gripping my elbow, a gesture that looked supportive from a distance but felt controlling up close. The same dining room held the same 3 people, their expressions suggesting they had been briefed about my earlier reluctance and were prepared to address resistance more directly this time. "Mr. Cooper, thank you for reconsidering our offer," Patricia began, with professional warmth that felt calculated rather than genuine. "We've prepared additional information that should address any concerns you might have raised yesterday." The documents they presented looked official and impressive, filled with legal language that was designed to sound authoritative while obscuring actual meaning. Investment partnerships, liability limitations, guaranteed returns, and penalty clauses that seemed to favor everyone except the person signing the agreements. I tried to read carefully, but the pressure to sign quickly made concentration difficult. "These terms seem very favorable to your organization and very risky for me," I said after reviewing the first few pages. "What happens if the investments don't perform as projected?" "Mr. Cooper, we've built in multiple safeguards to protect your interests. These are conservative projections based on proven strategies with established track records. The risk is minimal, while the benefits are substantial and immediate." Marcus leaned forward, his expression intense. "Dad, they're offering you guaranteed monthly payments that would cover all your living expenses and medical costs. How can you even consider refusing that kind of security?" The pressure felt overwhelming, coming from people who controlled information I didn't understand while claiming to offer solutions I desperately needed. But something deep in my gut warned against trusting people who used fear and urgency to prevent careful consideration of complex agreements. "I need more time to review these documents with someone who can explain the legal implications. This is too important to rush." The reaction was immediate and coordinated, like they had prepared for this response. Patricia's warmth disappeared, replaced with professional coldness that felt threatening. David's explanations became more insistent, focusing on limited time offers and other candidates waiting for opportunities I too indecisive to accept. Robert produced additional documents that supposedly addressed my concerns while actually adding more complexity and obligation. "Mr. Cooper, hesitation at this point suggests you don't fully appreciate the benefits we're offering or the alternatives you're facing. Your current financial situation leaves you few alternatives, and delaying this decision will only make those alternatives more limited and less favorable."
The implied threat hung in the air like smoke from a dangerous fire. These people had researched my circumstances thoroughly, understanding exactly which pressures would be most effective in securing my compliance. They knew about the medical bills, the rent payments, the careful budgeting that governed my daily existence. But more importantly, they seemed to know things about my situation that I hadn't shared with anyone except Marcus. "How exactly do you know so much about my personal finances?" I asked, feeling violated by their intimate knowledge of details I considered private. "Your son has been very helpful in explaining your circumstances. He's concerned about your welfare and wants to ensure you have the security you deserve in your final years." The phrase, "final years," hit like a slap, delivered with casual cruelty disguised as concern. These people saw me as a dying man whose desperation could be exploited for their benefit, with Marcus serving as their inside source of information and leverage. My son had apparently shared every detail of my financial struggles, every vulnerability that could be used to pressure me into compliance. "Marcus, is that true?
Have you been discussing my private business with these people?" I turned to face my son directly, hoping to see some sign of shame or regret in his expression. Instead, I saw calculation mixed with impatience. "Dad, I told them what they needed to know to help you. Sometimes getting assistance requires sharing information with people who are qualified to provide solutions." His answer revealed no understanding of betrayal, only irritation that I was questioning tactics he considered necessary and appropriate. "Those were private matters between us. You had no right to share that information without my permission." "I had every right to seek help from my father who's too proud to ask for assistance himself," Marcus shot back, his voice rising with frustration. "Dad, you've been struggling for months, worrying about money, rationing medications, avoiding medical appointments because of cost. I couldn't just watch you destroy your health out of stubborn independence." The accusations stung because they contained enough truth to be effective weapons. I had been cutting corners on medical care, choosing between prescriptions and groceries, postponing dental work and routine checkups because of their cost. But those were my choices to make, my problems to solve in my own way and my own time. That still doesn't give you permission to involve strangers in my personal business or bring me here under false pretenses, I replied, though my voice lacked the strength I wanted it to carry. Patricia leaned forward, her expression softening into what was probably supposed to be maternal concern. "Mr. Cooper, we understand this feels overwhelming. Making major financial decisions often does, especially when you've been managing independently for so long. But that's exactly why we're here, to help guide you through this process." The condescension was expertly delivered, making me feel like a confused child who needed adult supervision rather than a grown man capable of making his own decisions. I recognized the technique from salespeople who had tried to pressure Elena and me over the years, the assumption that age automatically meant incompetence and that confusion could be exploited for profit. "I don't need guidance from people whose motives I don't understand," I said firmly, summoning whatever dignity remained in this humiliating situation. "And I certainly don't need my son sharing my private information with strangers who claim to want to help me." "Mr. Cooper, we're not strangers," David interjected with professional patience. "We're licensed financial professionals with decades of experience helping people in situations exactly like yours. Your suspicion is understandable, but it's preventing you from accepting assistance that could transform your circumstances permanently." The arguments were skillfully crafted, addressing my concerns while dismissing them as irrational fear rather than legitimate caution. These people were clearly experienced in manipulating vulnerable populations, using techniques that combined emotional pressure with apparent professional authority. But something in their approach felt rehearsed, like they had used these same tactics on other desperate people in similar circumstances. "What happens to other people who've signed these agreements?" I asked, hoping to learn something about their actual track record rather than their promised projections. The question created a moment of uncomfortable silence before Patricia answered with careful precision,
Our clients generally preferred to maintain their privacy about personal financial arrangements, but we can assure you that satisfaction rates are very high among people who've chosen to work with us. The evasion told me everything I needed to know about their willingness to provide concrete information about actual outcomes. They could promise anything they wanted about future benefits while avoiding specific details about past performance. The lack of transparency felt especially ominous when combined with their detailed knowledge of my personal vulnerabilities. I want to speak with some of these satisfied clients before making any decisions, I said, knowing they would find reasons to refuse this reasonable request. Unfortunately, client confidentiality prevents us from sharing contact information, Robert replied smoothly, but we can provide testimonials and documentation about the success of our programs. The evasion confirmed my suspicions about their unwillingness to allow independent verification of their claims. Real professionals with legitimate track records would be eager to provide references and concrete evidence of successful outcomes. The fact that they couldn't or wouldn't do so suggested that their promises were designed to sound impressive while avoiding accountability for actual results. Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming text message that he read with obvious concern. His expression darkened as he typed a response, his fingers moving with urgent intensity that suggested important communication with someone who expected immediate replies. "Dad, we really need to move forward with this today. The timing is becoming critical, and delays could affect the availability of the programs they're offering." The artificial urgency felt familiar from countless sales pitches I had heard over the years, the claim that immediate action was required to avoid missing limited-time opportunities. But Marcus's obvious anxiety about the timing suggested that someone was pressuring him just as he was pressuring me, creating a chain of coercion that extended beyond this dining room. Who was that text from, Marcus? Who else is involved in this situation? Business associates, people who are counting on this deal to move forward as scheduled. His answer was deliberately vague, but his nervousness was becoming more obvious as time passed without my signature on their documents. What happens if this deal doesn't move forward as scheduled? Marcus and Patricia exchanged glances that confirmed my suspicion that consequences existed beyond simple disappointment about missed opportunities. These people were operating under pressures that made my cooperation essential rather than merely preferable, suggesting that refusing to sign could create problems for everyone involved. Mr. Cooper, let's focus on the benefits of moving forward rather than the complications of unnecessary delays. We have vehicles waiting to take you to see some of the properties involved in this investment, so you can understand exactly what your participation would support. The suggestion of leaving the country club for unknown destinations sent alarms through my entire nervous system. These people had already demonstrated their willingness to use coercion and manipulation, and isolating me from public spaces would only increase their ability to apply pressure without witnesses. "I'm not going anywhere else with any of you," I said firmly, standing from my chair despite the trembling in my legs. "Dad, you're being unreasonable. These people are trying to help you, and you're treating them like criminals instead of professionals offering legitimate assistance." "Let me pass, Marcus. I'm leaving now with or without your cooperation." Instead of stepping aside, he moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried unmistakable threat. "Dad, you're embarrassing yourself and creating problems for everyone involved. Sit back down and sign the documents so we can all move forward like rational adults."
The physical intimidation combined with psychological pressure felt like assault, even though Marcus hadn't actually touched me yet. His willingness to use his size and strength to prevent my leaving revealed someone who had moved completely beyond normal family boundaries into territory I didn't recognize or understand. "If you don't let me leave voluntarily, I'm going to start shouting for help until someone calls security," I warned, hoping the threat of public attention would be enough to make him reconsider his tactics. "Go ahead and shout, Dad. Tell everyone how your loving son is trying to solve your financial problems while you're being paranoid and uncooperative. See how much sympathy you get for refusing assistance from people who want to help you." His challenge revealed confidence that public opinion would favor him over me, that my resistance would be seen as evidence of confusion rather than legitimate self-protection. I looked around the dining room, noting other tables where well-dressed people conducted business conversations over expensive meals. Would any of them intervene if they realized what was happening? Or would they assume this was simply a family disagreement about an elderly man's care, the kind of private matter that didn't require outside involvement? Patricia rose from her chair with fluid grace, moving to position herself between me and the dining room's main exit. Mr. Cooper, there's no need for dramatics. We're all reasonable people trying to reach a mutually beneficial agreement. Why don't you sit back down so we can address whatever specific concerns are preventing you from moving forward? The coordinated blocking of my escape routes felt like a trap closing around me, with family and strangers working together to prevent my leaving until I surrendered to their demands. The realization that Marcus was willing to participate in what amounted to imprisonment shocked me more than anything else that had happened during this nightmare afternoon. "This is kidnapping," I said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, hoping someone would recognize the seriousness of the situation and take action to help me. "This is an intervention," Marcus replied with equal volume, his voice carrying the reasonable tone of someone dealing with the confused relative. "My father is struggling with financial and cognitive issues that are affecting his judgment about assistance that could save his life." The lie was delivered with such conviction that several nearby diners turned to look at us with expressions of sympathy rather than alarm. Marcus had instantly reframed the situation as concerned family helping a confused elderly man, rather than multiple people coercing someone who was trying to escape an unwanted situation. "I'm not confused, and I do not need an intervention," I protested, but my voice sounded weak and uncertain compared to Marcus's confident assertions. "These people are trying to pressure me into signing documents I don't understand for purposes that haven't been clearly explained." "Dad, please don't make this harder than it needs to be," Marcus said with practiced patience, his performance designed for our growing audience rather than genuine communication with me. "We're trying to help you maintain your independence and dignity while addressing problems that have become too big for you to handle alone." The manipulation was masterful, using my own stated values of independence and dignity as weapons against me, while portraying resistance as evidence of the cognitive decline he was claiming to address. I felt trapped between accepting their demands or appearing to confirm Marcus's accusations about my mental state. David approached from the side, carrying a pen and the documents they wanted me to sign. "Mr. Cooper, why don't we start with just one signature on the preliminary agreement? That gives everyone time to explain details while moving the process forward in a way that protects your interests." The strategy of incremental compliance was designed to make the first signature seem harmless while establishing momentum towards signing everything they wanted. Once I agreed to sign anything, it would become easier to pressure me into signing everything else, each step feeling like a natural progression rather than a separate decision. "I'm not signing anything until I've had these documents reviewed by an independent attorney," I said, though my resolve was weakening under the combined pressure from multiple directions. "Mr. Cooper, attorney review is certainly possible, but the timing constraints make immediate preliminary agreements necessary to preserve your position in these programs," Robert explained, with professional authority. "You can have everything reviewed later while ensuring you don't lose access to opportunities that might not be available tomorrow." The false choice between immediate action and permanent loss was a classic manipulation technique. But knowing that didn't make it less effective when combined with family pressure and social embarrassment. I felt my resistance crumbling under the weight of factors I couldn't control or counter effectively. Marcus's phone buzzed again with what was obviously an urgent message. His face paled as he read it, and his hand shook slightly as he typed a response. Whatever pressure he was under from his business associates was intensifying, making my cooperation even more critical for reasons I couldn't see but was beginning to fear. "Dad, please," he said, with what sounded like genuine desperation breaking through his rehearsed manipulation. "You have to sign these papers today. I can't explain everything here, but there are people involved who won't accept delays or excuses. If you don't cooperate, it's going to create serious problems for both of us." The admission of external pressure confirmed my suspicions that this situation extended far beyond investment opportunities and family assistance. Marcus had gotten himself involved with people who used fear and coercion to ensure compliance, And now he was trying to drag me into the same dangerous territory to solve problems he had created. What kind of people, Marcus? What have you gotten yourself into? The kind of people who don't make requests, they make demands, he replied quietly, his confident facade cracking enough to reveal genuine terror underneath. Dad, I'm sorry for lying to you, but I didn't know how else to get you here willingly. These people don't accept excuses, and they don't care about family relationships or moral objections. Patricia, David, and Robert watched our exchange with expressions that had shifted from professional courtesy to cold calculation. They had been patient with my resistance because they knew Marcus's desperation would eventually force my compliance, but their patience was clearly limited by external pressures they couldn't control either. Mr. Cooper, family loyalty sometimes requires sacrifices we don't want to make, Patricia said with icy precision. Your son's situation affects your situation now, whether you choose to acknowledge that connection or not. Cooperation benefits everyone involved, while resistance creates complications no one wants to experience. The threat was delivered with professional polish, but its meaning was unmistakable. These people had leverage over Marcus that extended to me, and they were prepared to use whatever methods necessary to secure my compliance with their demands. My choice was no longer between accepting their offer or refusing it, but between cooperating voluntarily or having cooperation forced from me through methods I didn't want to contemplate. I looked at my son, seeing him clearly, perhaps for the first time in years. The successful real estate agent who had always seemed confident and in control was actually a desperate man who had compromised his integrity and endangered his family to maintain an appearance of prosperity he couldn't afford. His willingness to involve me in his problems revealed someone who had lost any meaningful sense of boundaries or responsibility. Marcus, what exactly happens if I don't sign these documents?
Bad things, Dad. Things that affect where you live, what medical care you can get, whether you're safe in your own neighborhood. His voice carried the weight of knowledge about consequences he had already witnessed or experienced. These people have resources and connections that reach into every aspect of life. Refusing to cooperate doesn't protect you from them, it just makes you a problem they need to solve instead of an asset they want to preserve. The explanation revealed the full scope of the trap that had been constructed around me. Marcus's financial problems had created obligations to people who used systematic intimidation to ensure compliance. And now they wanted my assets and legal vulnerability as additional security for his debts. Whether I cooperated willingly or not, these people intended to use me to protect their interests. How long have you been planning this, son? Months, he admitted, with something that might have been shame if it weren't overwhelmed by fear. Dad, I kept hoping I could find another way to handle this situation without involving you. But the debts kept growing, the pressure kept increasing, and they finally told me that your cooperation wasn't optional anymore. The betrayal felt deeper than anything I had experienced since Elena's death. Marcus had spent months planning how to manipulate me into this situation, sharing my private information with criminals, using my love for him as a weapon against my own interests. The son I had raised with patience and sacrifice had become someone who saw his father as a resource to be exploited when other options failed. David placed the documents on the table in front of me, pointing to signature lines that had been marked with yellow highlighter. Mr. Cooper, we understand this feels overwhelming, but the decision is actually quite simple. Sign here and everyone's problems get solved peacefully. Refuse to sign and everyone's problems get much more complicated and dangerous. The pen felt impossibly heavy as I reached for it, understanding that this moment would define the rest of my life and probably determine how it would end. These people had constructed a situation where my choices were limited to different forms of victimization, with cooperation offering slightly better treatment than resistance, but no possibility of genuine freedom. Marcus leaned forward, his voice urgent with desperation. Dad, please, I know this isn't what you wanted, but it's the only option that keeps us both safe. These people don't make empty threats, and they don't accept partial cooperation.
If you sign, we can work together to manage the situation. If you don't sign, we're both going to face consequences that are much worse than anything in those documents." I held the pen over the signature line, my hand trembling with fear and rage for the relationship that had brought me to this moment. The boy I had taught to ride a bicycle and helped with homework and celebrated at graduation had become a man who would sacrifice his father's safety for his own survival. "Marcus, if I sign these documents, what guarantee do I have that this ends here? How do I know these people won't keep making additional demands once they have legal control over my assets?" "You don't," he replied, with brutal honesty that was probably the first truth he had told me all day. "Dad, people like this don't give guarantees or honor limitations. They take what they want and keep taking until there's nothing left. But cooperation gives you some protection, while resistance guarantees retaliation." The admission that signing offered no real security, only delayed victimization, crystallized my understanding of the choice I faced. These people intended to control and exploit me regardless of my cooperation, with the only question being whether that exploitation would be gradual or immediate. I set down the pen and pushed the documents away from me with as much dignity as I could manage. "No, I won't sign anything that gives these people legal control over my life or assets. If you've gotten yourself involved with criminals, that's your problem to solve, not mine." The reaction was immediate and coordinated. Patricia's professional mask disappeared, revealing cold fury that felt genuinely dangerous. David and Robert moved to block exit routes more obviously, abandoning any pretense that this was a voluntary business meeting. Marcus grabbed my arm with enough force to bruise, his desperation overriding any remaining concern for my well-being. "Dad, you don't understand what you're doing," he said through gritted teeth. "These people don't accept refusal. If you won't cooperate voluntarily, they'll find ways to force your cooperation that you really won't enjoy." "Let go of my arm, Marcus. You're hurting me." Instead of releasing me, he tightened his grip, using physical pain as additional leverage to secure my compliance. "Sign the documents, Dad. Don't make this harder than it needs to be for either of us." The transformation of my son into someone who would use violence against his elderly father felt like watching him die and be replaced by a stranger wearing his face. I had spent decades teaching him right from wrong, modeling patience and integrity, believing that love and guidance would shape him into a good man. Now I was discovering that fear and desperation could erase all of that in a matter of months. I set down the pen and pushed the documents away from me with as much dignity as I could manage. "No, I won't sign anything that gives these people legal control over my life or assets. If you've gotten yourself involved with criminals, that's your problem to solve, not mine." The reaction was immediate and coordinated. Patricia's professional mask disappeared, revealing cold fury that felt genuinely dangerous. David and Robert moved to block exit routes more obviously, abandoning any pretense that this was a voluntary business meeting. Marcus grabbed my arm with enough force to bruise, his desperation overriding any remaining concern for my well-being. "Dad, you don't understand what you're doing," he said through gritted teeth. "These people don't accept refusal. If you won't cooperate voluntarily, they'll find ways to force your cooperation that you really won't enjoy." "Let go of my arm, Marcus. You're hurting me." Instead of releasing me, he tightened his grip, using physical pain as additional leverage to secure my compliance. "Sign the documents, Dad. Don't make this harder than it needs to be for either of us." The transformation of my son into someone who would use violence against his elderly father felt like watching him die and be replaced by a stranger wearing his face. I had spent decades teaching him right from wrong, modeling patience and integrity, believing that love and guidance would shape him into a good man. Now I was discovering that fear and desperation could erase all of that in a matter of months. "I said no, and I meant no," I replied as firmly as my trembling voice would allow. Release my arm and let me leave, or I start screaming for help until security comes to investigate what's happening in this dining room." Patricia laughed, a sound like breaking glass that made several nearby diners look in our direction with concern. "Mr. Cooper, what exactly do you think security is going to do? Your son brought you here for a business meeting, and you're having some sort of episode that's disrupting other guests. They'll probably call for medical assistance to help with your obvious confusion and agitation. The threat to have me declared mentally incompetent and forcibly medicated or institutionalized added another layer of terror to an already impossible situation. These people had clearly considered various ways to neutralize my resistance, including methods that would make cooperation irrelevant by removing my legal capacity to refuse their demands." Marcus's phone rang with an incoming call that he answered immediately, stepping slightly away from the table while maintaining his grip on my arm. I could hear an angry male voice delivering what sounded like ultimatums and threats, with Marcus responding in apologetic tones that revealed his complete subordination to whoever was calling. "Yes, sir, I understand the timeline," Marcus said into the phone. "There have been some complications with my father's cooperation, but we're working through them now." A pause while the caller responded with what sounded like shouted instructions. "No, sir, he hasn't signed yet, but I'm confident we can resolve this today." The conversation continued, with Marcus promising outcomes he obviously couldn't guarantee while trying to placate someone who clearly held his life in their hands. When he finally hung up, his face had gone pale with sweat beading on his forehead despite the country club's air conditioning.
"Dad, that was my business partner," he said quietly, though everyone at the table understood that business partner was a euphemism for someone much more dangerous. "He's not happy about the delays, and he's made it clear that cooperation isn't optional anymore for either of us." What does that mean exactly? "It means we have about 10 minutes to get your signature on those documents before alternative methods become necessary," Patricia answered for Marcus, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to giving orders that weren't questioned. "Mr. Cooper, this has moved beyond requests and negotiations. Your cooperation is going to happen today, one way or another." The finality in her tone made it clear that they had reached the end of persuasion and moved into compulsion. Whatever happened next would be determined by their needs rather than my consent, with my well-being becoming irrelevant to their calculations about how to achieve their objectives. I looked around the dining room one more time, noting that several other tables had cleared out while our confrontation escalated. The remaining diners were either too absorbed in their own conversations to notice our situation or too uncomfortable to intervene in what appeared to be a family dispute. No help was coming from strangers who had their own problems to worry about. "Marcus, is this really what you want your life to become? Threatening your own father to satisfy criminals who will never be satisfied no matter what you give them?" For just a moment, I saw a flicker of the child I had raised, someone who remembered right from wrong and understood the weight of moral choices. But the moment passed quickly, overwhelmed by fear that had become his primary motivation for every decision. "Dad, I don't want any of this. But wanting different things doesn't change the reality of what's happening here." His voice carried the defeated tone of someone who had given up any hope of controlling his own fate. "These people don't care what I want or what you want. They care about what they want, and they get what they want by any means necessary." David reached into his briefcase and pulled out what looked like medical forms, along with a small case containing syringes and vials of clear liquid. "Mr. Cooper, we really hoped this could be handled through normal business channels, but since you're determined to be difficult, we've prepared alternative methods for securing your cooperation." The threat of forced medication sent ice through my veins as I realized how thoroughly they had planned for every possibility. These people weren't just criminals. They were organized criminals with access to medical resources and legal documentation that could make my resistance irrelevant. Once they drugged me into compliance, I could be made to sign anything they wanted while appearing to cooperate voluntarily. "That's assault with a deadly weapon," I said loud enough for the entire dining room to hear. "You're threatening to drug me against my will to force me to sign legal documents." We're prepared to provide medical assistance to an elderly gentleman who's experiencing a psychological crisis that's preventing him from making rational decisions about his own welfare, Robert replied smoothly, his words carefully chosen to sound like compassionate intervention rather than criminal coercion. Marcus stared at the medical supplies with obvious horror, apparently not having been warned about this escalation in their methods. "Wait a minute, nobody said anything about drugging him. This was supposed to be about persuasion and pressure, not forced medication." "Your father's resistance has moved us beyond persuasion," Patricia replied coldly. "The people we represent don't accept failure, and they don't care about your comfort level with necessary methods. Either you help us secure his cooperation, or you become as much of a problem as he is." The threat to Marcus revealed that his usefulness to these people was conditional on his ability to deliver what they wanted from me. If he couldn't or wouldn't help them exploit his father, they would discard him as easily as they would discard me, probably with similar consequences for his health and safety. "Dad, I'm sorry," Marcus whispered, though whether he was apologizing for what had already happened or what was about to happen remained unclear. "I never wanted it to go this far, but I don't know how to stop it anymore." David began preparing one of the syringes, filling it with clear liquid while keeping his movements subtle enough to avoid attracting attention from other diners. The casual efficiency of his actions suggested he had done this before, that forced medication was a standard tool in their arsenal of persuasion techniques. I stood abruptly, my chair falling backward with a crash that finally drew attention from every table in the dining room. "Help me!" I shouted as loudly as my 73-year-old lungs would allow. "These people are trying to drug me and force me to sign documents against my will." The response was immediate, but not what I had hoped for. Marcus grabbed me from behind, wrapping his arms around my chest in what appeared to be a protective embrace, but was actually a restraint preventing my escape. Patricia moved to my side, speaking in soothing tones, designed for our audience rather than my benefit. "Sir, please calm down. You're having an episode, and we're here to help you through it. Your son is very concerned about your condition, and we are medical professionals who specialize in geriatric psychiatric crises." The lie was delivered with such conviction that several concerned diners approached our table offering assistance with what they now perceived as a medical emergency rather than a criminal assault. Marcus played his role perfectly, portraying a loving son trying to help his confused father, while Patricia and David assumed the authority of medical professionals responding to a psychiatric crisis. "He's been having these episodes more frequently," Marcus told the gathering crowd, his voice carrying just the right mixture of love and exhaustion. "Dad, you're safe. No one is trying to hurt you. We're just trying to help you understand the documents that will provide better care for your condition." The reframing of my resistance as evidence of mental illness was brilliant and terrifying, transforming justified fear into symptoms that required medical intervention. I found myself fighting not just against these criminals, but against well-meaning strangers who wanted to help someone they perceived as a confused elderly man having a psychiatric breakdown. "I am not having an episode," I protested, but my voice sounded weak and desperate compared to the calm authority of people who claimed medical expertise. "Dad, please don't make this harder than it needs to be," Marcus said with what sounded like genuine anguish. "The doctors are here to help you, and fighting against treatment is only going to make your condition worse." David approached with the prepared syringe, now carrying it as medical equipment rather than a weapon. "This will just help you relax, so we can discuss your situation more calmly. It's a mild sedative that's commonly used for elderly patients experiencing agitation and confusion." I tried to break free from Marcus's restraint, but 73-year-old muscles were no match for his determination and the assistance he was now receiving from concerned bystanders who wanted to help subdue someone they believed was dangerous to himself. The more I struggled, the more everyone became convinced that I needed medical intervention. "Please," I begged the crowd that had gathered around us, "look at these documents they want me to sign."
Check their credentials. Call the police to verify their authority to administer medication. But my pleas sounded like the desperate arguments of someone trying to avoid necessary treatment rather than legitimate requests for protection from criminals. The syringe moved closer to my arm as David prepared to inject whatever drug they had chosen to eliminate my resistance. I could see my reflection in the dining room's windows, an elderly man being restrained by multiple people while medical professionals prepared to provide treatment for his obvious psychological distress. From the outside, it looked exactly like compassionate intervention rather than sophisticated criminal assault. In that moment of absolute desperation, with the needle almost touching my skin, I remembered something Elena had always told me about fighting battles I couldn't win through conventional means. Sometimes the only way to defeat a superior enemy was to change the rules of engagement entirely, to create chaos that disrupted their careful plans and forced them to react to unexpected circumstances. I stopped struggling against the restraints and let my body go completely limp, falling toward the floor with sudden dead weight that caught everyone by surprise. As Marcus scrambled to prevent my collapse, I managed to grab my phone from my jacket pocket and activate the emergency recording function Elena had shown me years ago. "My name is Franklin Cooper," I said clearly into the phone as concerned voices surrounded me. "I am being held against my will by people claiming to be medical professionals who want to force me to sign financial documents. My son, Marcus Cooper, has been threatened by criminals who are using him to coerce my cooperation. If something happens to me, investigate Patricia Hendricks, David Chen, and Robert Martinez, who claim to represent an investment group but are actually working for dangerous people who use violence and intimidation to collect debts." The effect was electric. Patricia lunged for my phone while David hesitated with the syringe, and Marcus tried to silence me without appearing to assault his father in front of witnesses. But the damage was done. My words had been recorded and transmitted to emergency services through the automated system Elena had insisted I activate on my device. "Turn off that phone," Patricia hissed, abandoning her professional facade as she realized I had documented their criminal activity and connected it to their real identities. "Stop recording immediately." "The recording has already been transmitted to emergency services," I lied, hoping they would believe the threat was real enough to change their behavior. "Everything that's happened here has been documented and sent to police computers automatically." David dropped the syringe as if it had become radioactive, understanding that being caught with drugs and medical equipment while trying to force medication on an unwilling victim would destroy any pretense of legitimate medical intervention. Robert moved toward the dining room exit, clearly preparing to abandon his partners if the situation deteriorated further. Marcus released his grip on my arms, stepping back with obvious confusion about whether to continue helping his criminal partners or distance himself from activities that were now being recorded as evidence. The crowd of concerned diners began murmuring among themselves as they processed what they had just heard, their perception of the situation shifting from medical emergency to possible criminal activity. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said to the assembled crowd while struggling to stand with as much dignity as possible, "these people are not medical professionals, and I am not having a psychological episode. They have been trying to force me to sign financial documents by threatening me with injection of unknown drugs. I ask that someone please call the police to investigate this situation." Patricia made one final attempt to control the narrative, her voice carrying desperate authority as she tried to convince the crowd that I was delusional and dangerous. "This gentleman is experiencing a severe paranoid episode that's making him believe people who are trying to help him are actually criminals. Please don't let his condition prevent him from receiving necessary medical care." But her credibility had been damaged by my recording and the obvious criminal paraphernalia they had brought to what was supposed to be a business meeting. Several diners were already pulling out their phones to call police, while others moved to block the exits to prevent the supposed criminals from escaping before authorities arrived. Marcus grabbed my arm one more time, his voice urgent with panic. "Dad, we have to leave right now. These people aren't going to let this go, and staying here will only make things worse for both of us." His terror was genuine, suggesting that whoever controlled him would punish failure regardless of the circumstances that caused it. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Marcus. This ends here." I pulled free from his grasp with strength that surprised both of us, fueled by anger that had finally overcome fear. "Whatever consequences you face for your criminal associations are consequences you brought on yourself by choosing to involve me in your problems." David and Robert were already moving toward the exit, abandoning Patricia and Marcus to face whatever legal consequences followed from their failed attempt to force my cooperation. Their willingness to sacrifice partners revealed the disposable nature of relationships in criminal organizations, where loyalty lasted as long as usefulness. Patricia made one final threat as sirens began approaching the country club. "Mr. Cooper, this isn't over. The people we represent don't accept failure, and they don't forget when someone causes them problems. You've made a very dangerous enemy today." "Then they can get in line behind all the other problems I survived in 73 years, I replied with more courage than I felt. "I'd rather face dangerous enemies than surrender my dignity to cowards who threaten elderly men and use their own children as weapons." The first police officers entered the dining room as Patricia and Robert reached the exit. Their professional training immediately assessed a situation where multiple people were shouting conflicting accusations about medical emergencies and criminal activity. Marcus stood frozen between his criminal partners and his father, understanding that his next decision would determine which side of the law he ended up on. "Officers, I'm Franklin Cooper," I said as clearly as possible despite my shaking voice. "These people attempted to force me to sign financial documents by threatening me with injection of unknown drugs. I have a recording of their threats and demands, and I want to file formal charges for attempted assault, kidnapping, and financial coercion." The lead officer looked around the dining room, noting the medical supplies scattered on our table, the overturned chair, and the crowd of witnesses who could provide independent verification of events. "Sir, we'll need to sort through exactly what happened here, but first we need to make sure everyone is safe and secure." Marcus stepped forward with his hands visible, his real estate training helping him navigate law enforcement interaction despite his obvious fear. "Officer, I'm this man's son, and there's been a serious misunderstanding about a business meeting that got out of hand. I can explain everything if you'll give me a chance." But the damage had been done. Too many witnesses had heard too much truth for any explanation to restore the fiction that this had been a legitimate business meeting. Patricia, David, and Robert were already being detained for questioning, while Marcus faced the choice between cooperating with police investigation or joining his criminal partners in custody. I sat heavily in one of the remaining chairs, my legs finally giving out under the weight of everything that had happened. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the confrontation was fading, leaving behind exhaustion and the full emotional impact of discovering who my son had really become. Marcus stood a few feet away, still caught between the criminal world that owned him and the father he had tried to sacrifice to save himself. The police interview process took 3 hours, conducted in a conference room the country club manager had provided to avoid disrupting other guests. Detective Sarah Morrison proved to be a patient questioner who understood the complexity of family dynamics mixed with criminal coercion. She recorded everything while taking detailed notes, asking clarifying questions that helped build a timeline of Marcus's gradual entanglement with people who used family relationships as leverage for their illegal activities. "Mr. Cooper, I need you to understand that what happened here today represents serious criminal charges. Attempted assault with a controlled substance, financial coercion of an elderly person, conspiracy to commit fraud."
These people weren't playing games, and they weren't going to stop with your signature on those documents. I nodded, understanding finally that my resistance had probably saved my life rather than simply protecting my assets. People who would drug someone into compliance weren't planning to honor any agreements or limitations once they had what they wanted. They would have used my signatures to access everything I owned, then discarded me when I was no longer useful to their operations. "What happens to Marcus?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. That depends on several factors, including his willingness to cooperate with our investigation and testify against the people who were controlling him. Detective Morrison's expression softened slightly as she looked toward the door where Marcus waited with another officer. "Mr. Cooper, your son is a victim as well as a perpetrator here. The people he got involved with specialize in finding legitimate business people who are vulnerable to financial pressure, then using that pressure to force participation in criminal activities." The explanation provided context without excusing Marcus's behavior, acknowledging that fear could drive people to betray their own values while maintaining that those choices still carried consequences. I appreciated Detective Morrison's balanced perspective, refusing to treat Marcus as either pure victim or pure criminal, while recognizing the complex dynamics that had brought us to this point. "I want him to face consequences for what he did to me," I said quietly. "But I also want him to have a chance to rebuild his life away from these people, if that's possible. We'll work with the district attorney's office to develop a plea agreement that addresses both those concerns," Detective Morrison assured me. "Your son's cooperation could be crucial in building cases against the people at the top of this organization, and helping us could provide him with protection and a path toward redemption." After giving my formal statement and providing the recorded evidence from my phone, I was finally free to leave the country club that had become the scene of one of the worst days of my life. Marcus approached me in the parking lot, his face showing exhaustion and shame that seemed genuine for the first time since this nightmare began. "Dad, I know you probably never want to see me again," he said quietly, his voice carrying none of the artificial confidence that had characterized our recent interactions. "But I need you to know that I never wanted to hurt you. I was trying to protect my family the only way I knew how, and I made terrible choices that put everyone I love in danger." I studied my son's face, looking for signs of the child I had raised with patience and hope. He was still there underneath the fear and desperation, still recognizable as someone who might be capable of redemption if he was willing to do the hard work of changing his life completely. "Marcus, I love you because you're my son, but I don't trust you anymore because of the choices you've made. If you want to rebuild our relationship, you'll need to prove over time that you've learned from this experience and become someone who deserves trust again." "I understand," he said, tears finally breaking through the emotional barriers he had maintained throughout our ordeal. "Dad, the people I got involved with, they're not going to be happy about what happened today. You might want to consider staying somewhere else for a while, until the police can determine how dangerous the situation really is." The warning sent a chill through me as I realized that my victory over immediate threats might have created longer-term dangers I hadn't considered. Criminal organizations didn't simply accept defeat and move on to other targets. They retaliated against people who caused them problems, and I had definitely caused them significant problems by recording their activities and involving law enforcement. Where would I go? I can't afford hotels or extended stays away from my apartment. Detective Morrison mentioned victim assistance programs that provide temporary housing for people in situations like yours. "Dad, please don't let pride prevent you from accepting help that could keep you safe. These people have long memories and resources I never fully understood until it was too late." I accepted Marcus's advice about seeking protective assistance, understanding that my financial constraints made me vulnerable to retaliation in ways that could be easily exploited. The same medical bills and housing insecurity that had made me a target for their initial scheme also made me defenseless against whatever revenge they might plan for disrupting their operation. Detective Morrison arranged for me to speak with victim services coordinators who specialize in cases involving organized criminal activity. The conversation revealed disturbing information about the scope of the organization Marcus had become involved with, including their history of targeting elderly people through family connections and their willingness to use violence against witnesses who threatened their operations. "Mr. Cooper, we're recommending that you accept placement in our witness protection housing program for at least the next month. These people have demonstrated patterns of retaliation against family members of people who've cooperated with law enforcement, and your safety could be at serious risk if you return to your normal routine." The prospect of abandoning my apartment and familiar neighborhood felt like another form of victimization, forcing me to sacrifice my independence and stability because of dangers created by my son's criminal associations. But the alternative of staying home and hoping for the best seemed foolishly optimistic given what I had learned about these people's methods and resources. What happens to my belongings, my medical appointments, my normal life while I'm hiding from criminals my son brought into our family? We'll work with you to maintain medical care and handle essential business remotely. As for belongings, we can arrange for supervised visits to collect necessary items, and law enforcement will monitor your apartment for any unwanted attention. The practical arrangements for witness protection felt simultaneously comprehensive and insufficient, addressing immediate safety concerns while leaving larger questions about my future unresolved. How long would I need to live in hiding? What guarantees exist that these people would eventually lose interest in punishing me? Would my life ever return to the simple routine I had established after Alina's death? Marcus remained in custody pending his decision about cooperation with authorities, facing charges that could result in significant prison time if he chose not to testify against his criminal partners. I visited him once at the county jail, a conversation that revealed both his genuine remorse and his genuine terror about the consequences of betraying people who had controlled his life for months. "Dad, they've already moved their operation and changed their methods because of what happened at the country club. The detective says my information could help prevent other families from going through what we went through, but these people don't forgive cooperation with law enforcement." I could see the internal battle Marcus was fighting, torn between doing the right thing by helping authorities and protecting himself from retaliation by remaining silent. The fear in his eyes reminded me of how he used to look as a child when facing consequences for misbehavior, except now the stakes were measured in years of imprisonment or potential violence rather than temporary punishments. "Son, what would your mother tell you to do in this situation?" The question hit him like a physical blow, bringing fresh tears to eyes that had already shed too many. Alina had been the moral compass of our family, the one who helped us navigate difficult decisions by asking what kind of people we wanted to be, rather than focusing only on what outcomes we wanted to achieve. "She'd tell me to do the right thing regardless of the personal cost," Marcus admitted quietly. "Mom always said that integrity was the only thing people couldn't take away from you unless you gave it away yourself. I gave mine away months ago, but maybe I can still choose to get it back." 3 days later, Marcus agreed to cooperate with the federal investigation that had grown out of our case. The organization he had become involved with operated across multiple states, using legitimate businesses as fronts for money laundering and elder abuse schemes that targeted vulnerable populations with sophisticated manipulation techniques. Detective Morrison called to update me on the progress of the case and the additional security measures being implemented to protect witnesses who were helping build prosecutions against the criminal network. The scope of their operation was larger than anyone initially realized, involving dozens of people in various roles, from street-level recruiters to financial specialists who helped launder proceeds from their crimes. Detective Morrison said the information she shared with me from the time I had with another detective from the other state made it clear that there were other similar cases related to this big network too. Not mentioning any further more of this so-called info from Marcus just made sure that I didn't get any more attention than I already had, and mentioned there should not be any concern from suspicion to another group unless I got something new from my apartment.
The scale of the criminal organization that had targeted our family made my individual experience feel both more significant and more frightening. I wasn't just a random victim of opportunistic criminals, but part of a systematic operation that used family bonds as weapons to control multiple generations of victims simultaneously. Life in witness protection proved to be both safer and more isolating than I had anticipated. The apartment they provided was comfortable and secure, located in a building with surveillance cameras and controlled access that made unauthorized visits virtually impossible. But the safety came at the cost of the community connections that had sustained me since Elena's death, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the weight of everything that had happened. The other residents of the witness protection facility included a grandmother whose grandson had been involved in drug trafficking, a businessman whose partner had been embezzling money for organized crime, and a widow whose late husband's gambling debts had made her a target for violent collection attempts. Our shared experiences created an odd form of community, people brought together by their children's criminal associations and their own need for protection from consequences they hadn't chosen. "The hardest part isn't the fear," explained Margaret, the grandmother whose situation most closely resembled mine. "It's realizing that the child you raised and loved became someone capable of putting you in danger for their own benefit. How do you process that kind of betrayal while still loving them?" The question captured the central emotional challenge of my situation, the conflict between parental love that couldn't be turned off and justified anger about being victimized by someone I had trusted completely. Marcus remained my son regardless of his choices, but he had also become someone whose judgment and loyalty could no longer be trusted. "I keep thinking about the moments when I should have seen warning signs," I admitted during one of our evening conversations in the facility's common room. "The questions about my finances, the sudden interest in spending time together, the pressure to make quick decisions about opportunities I didn't understand. Were those signs of criminal involvement or just normal concern from a son who was trying to help his struggling father?" Margaret nodded with understanding born from similar self-examination. "My grandson started asking about my savings account and life insurance policies months before the drug dealers came to my house. At the time, I thought he was being responsible and caring about my future. Now I realize he was conducting inventory for people who planned to steal everything I had." The Witness Protection Program included counseling services designed to help participants process the trauma of being victimized by family members, while maintaining the emotional stability necessary to testify effectively in criminal proceedings. My counselor, Dr. Elizabeth Chen, specialized in family betrayal cases and understood the unique psychological challenges of loving someone who had tried to harm you. "Franklin, your relationship with Marcus doesn't have to be defined entirely by what happened during this crisis," Dr. Chen explained during one of our sessions. "People can change, learn from mistakes, and rebuild trust over time. But that process requires genuine accountability and consistent demonstration of different choices, not just apologies and promises." The counseling helped me understand that rebuilding our relationship would require Marcus to do substantial work beyond simply cooperating with law enforcement. He would need to understand how his choices had affected not just me, but everyone who cared about him, take responsibility for those consequences, and demonstrate over years rather than months that he had genuinely changed his priorities and decision-making process. 6 weeks into my stay at the Witness Protection Facility, Detective Morrison called with news that the first round of arrests had been completed. Patricia, David, and Robert had been charged with multiple felonies related to elder abuse, financial fraud, and conspiracy to commit assault. The people they worked for remained under investigation, but the immediate threat to my safety had been significantly reduced by dismantling their local operation. "Mr. Cooper, we're comfortable with you returning to your normal living situation, though we'll maintain periodic security checks for the next few months," Detective Morrison explained. "The people at the top of this organization are focused on larger concerns than individual witnesses now that their operation has been exposed and their assets are being seized." The return to my apartment felt like visiting a place from my past rather than coming home to familiar surroundings. 6 weeks away had created enough distance that everything looked smaller and shabbier than I remembered, though nothing had actually changed except my perspective on what constituted security and comfort. The neighbors who had witnessed Marcus forcing me into his car greeted me with a mixture of concern and curiosity, eager to hear what had happened, but respectful enough not to press for details I might not want to share. Mrs. Patterson brought me a casserole and offered to help with grocery shopping until I felt comfortable resuming normal routines. "Franklin, that boy of yours seemed so polite and successful. It's hard to believe he could get involved with such dangerous people. Makes you wonder who you can really trust these days." The observation captured something essential about the experience of being betrayed by family members. It didn't just damage your relationship with that specific person,
It undermined your confidence in your ability to judge character and recognize warning signs in other relationships. If I couldn't trust my own son, how could I trust anyone else? Marcus's trial was scheduled for the following spring, giving prosecutors time to build comprehensive cases against all members of the criminal organization they had identified through his cooperation and other evidence. Marcus remained in custody because the judge considered him a flight risk, but also because his safety couldn't be guaranteed if he was released before the trials concluded. I visited him monthly at the county jail, conversations that gradually evolved from awkward apologies to genuine discussions about rebuilding trust and planning for his eventual release. Marcus was participating in counseling programs designed to help inmates understand the psychological factors that had contributed to their criminal behavior and develop healthier strategies for handling future stress and pressure. "Dad, I've been thinking about what I want my life to look like after this is over," Marcus said during one of our December visits, his appearance showing the effects of months in custody, but also suggesting better mental health than he had displayed during our crisis. "I know I'll probably lose my real estate license and have to start over professionally, but maybe that's not such a bad thing." The comment suggested genuine reflection about the lifestyle and priorities that had made him vulnerable to criminal recruitment in the first place. His success in real estate required maintaining appearances and meeting financial obligations that had gradually become unsustainable, creating the desperation that criminals had exploited to control his behavior. "What kind of work are you considering?" "Maybe construction or maintenance work, something honest where the value I provide is straightforward and the people I work with are dealing with legitimate problems." The conversation revealed a level of self-awareness that had been missing during the months that criminal pressure had dominated his decision-making process. Marcus was beginning to understand how his previous values and priorities had contributed to his vulnerability, and he was genuinely considering different approaches to building a meaningful life. "Son, I'm glad to hear you thinking about these things seriously, but understanding what went wrong is only the first step towards building something better." "I know, Dad. The counselor here has been helping me see how fear and pride combined to make me rationalize choices I knew were wrong. When I first borrowed money from these people, I told myself it was a temporary solution to a temporary problem. But every compromise made the next compromise easier, until I couldn't see any way out except involving you." The explanation provided insight into the gradual process by which good people become complicit in criminal activities, showing how small compromises can escalate into major betrayals when fear and desperation override moral judgment. "Marcus, rebuilding trust between us is going to take time and consistent demonstration that you've learned from this experience. I love you because you're my son, but love isn't enough to restore a relationship that's been damaged by betrayal and violence." "I understand, Dad. I'm not asking you to forgive me or trust me right now. I'm just asking for the chance to prove over time that I can become someone who deserves your trust again." The spring trial became a media sensation as prosecutors revealed the full scope of the criminal organization that had operated across multiple states for several years. Marcus's testimony proved crucial in convicting the leadership structure, though his cooperation agreement still resulted in a 2-year prison sentence for his own participation in their schemes. Patricia, David, and Robert received sentences ranging from 5 to 12 years, while the people they worked for faced federal charges that could result in decades of imprisonment.
The judge commended Marcus for his cooperation while emphasizing that fear and financial pressure didn't excuse the choices he had made to victimize his own family. "Mr. Cooper, you showed tremendous courage in standing up to people who were trying to exploit your love for your son," Judge Williams said during the sentencing hearing. "Your willingness to resist their coercion and document their criminal activity has helped protect other families from similar victimization." The recognition felt meaningful, though it couldn't erase the emotional cost of discovering that the son I had raised with love and patience had been willing to sacrifice my safety for his own survival. Justice in the legal system provided closure for the criminal aspects of our experience, but healing the family relationships damaged by betrayal would require different kinds of work over much longer periods of time.
Marcus was transferred to a federal facility where he would serve his sentence while participating in programs designed to help white-collar criminals develop skills and perspectives that would support legitimate careers after release. The facility specialized in cases involving family betrayal and financial crime, recognizing that these offenders often require different rehabilitation approaches than violent criminals or career thieves. During his incarceration, Marcus maintained regular correspondence with me. Letters that gradually evolved from expressions of remorse to discussions of practical plans for rebuilding his life after release. He completed educational programs in construction management and small business operation, preparing for career options that would provide honest income without requiring the kind of high-stakes financial management that had made him vulnerable to criminal recruitment. "Dad, I've been accepted into a work release program that would allow me to gain experience in construction while finishing my sentence," Marcus wrote in one of his letters. The program includes job placement assistance and ongoing counseling to help participants transition back into community life successfully. The news suggested that Marcus was taking advantage of rehabilitation opportunities rather than simply serving time and waiting for release. His letters showed increasing maturity and self-awareness, indicating that the counseling and educational programs were helping him develop healthier approaches to handling stress and making decisions under pressure. 2 years after our confrontation at the country club, Marcus was released into a halfway house program that required him to maintain employment, participate in ongoing counseling, and submit to regular monitoring of his financial activities. The conditions were designed to prevent relapse into criminal behavior while providing support for successful reintegration into legitimate society. Our first meeting after his release took place at a restaurant near the halfway house, a public setting that felt safe for both of us as we navigated the awkward process of rebuilding a relationship that had been damaged by betrayal and violence. Marcus looked older and thinner than I remembered, but also calmer and more thoughtful in his manner and speech. "Dad, I know I have a lot of work to do to earn back your trust," he began carefully. "I'm not asking you to forget what happened or pretend that everything is normal between us. I'm just hoping for the chance to show you over time that I've learned from my mistakes and become someone who deserves to be part of your life again." The conversation continued for 2 hours, covering practical matters like his employment prospects and housing arrangements, as well as deeper questions about accountability, forgiveness, and the possibility of genuine redemption after serious moral failure. Marcus demonstrated understanding of the harm he had caused that went beyond simple regret about negative consequences for himself. "Son, I appreciate that you're taking responsibility for your choices and working to build a better life. But rebuilding our relationship is going to require consistent demonstration of different priorities and better judgment over months and years, not just good intentions and apologies." "I understand, Dad. I'm committed to proving that I've changed through my actions rather than my words. The counseling has helped me see how fear and pride led me to make choices that betrayed everything you taught me about integrity and family loyalty." Over the following months, Marcus maintained steady employment with a construction company, lived within his means at the halfway house, and participated regularly in counseling, designed to help former criminals avoid the psychological patterns that had contributed to their offenses. Our relationship gradually evolved from formal visits to cautious friendship as he demonstrated consistency in his new values and priorities. "Franklin, you've handled an impossible situation with remarkable grace," Dr. Chen observed during one of our final counseling sessions. "Maintaining love for someone who betrayed you while still holding them accountable for their choices requires emotional strength that not everyone possesses." The reflection helped me understand that surviving family betrayal had required developing new forms of resilience and wisdom that would serve me well in other challenging situations. I had learned to distinguish between love and trust, to maintain appropriate boundaries while remaining open to genuine redemption, and to protect myself from manipulation while still believing in people's capacity for positive change. 3 years after the crisis that had nearly destroyed our family, Marcus completed his supervised release program and moved into his own apartment. He had saved enough money from construction work to make a security deposit and furnish a modest space, demonstrating financial responsibility that had been missing during his real estate career. "Dad, would you like to see my new place?" he asked during one of our monthly dinners, a tradition we had established to maintain regular contact while he proved his commitment to rebuilding our relationship.
The apartment reflected his new priorities, furnished simply but comfortably with items purchased within his means rather than financed through credit that might tempt him toward financial shortcuts. Photos of our family during happier times decorated the walls, alongside certificates from the educational and counseling programs he had completed during his incarceration. "This feels like a home rather than a showplace," I observed, noting the absence of expensive items designed to impress visitors rather than serve practical purposes. "That's exactly what I was aiming for," Marcus replied with quiet satisfaction. "During my real estate career, I was so focused on maintaining an image of success that I forgot what actually mattered. This apartment represents values I want to live by rather than appearances I want to maintain." Our relationship continued evolving slowly, built on honest communication about our shared experience and mutual commitment to preventing similar crises in the future. Marcus never asked me to forget what happened or pretend that his rehabilitation erased the harm he had caused, instead working patiently to demonstrate that he had genuinely changed his approach to handling life's challenges. "Son, I'm proud of the work you've done to rebuild your life," I told him during his 35th birthday celebration, a small gathering that included the few friends who had supported him through his legal troubles and recovery process. "What you did to me was unforgivable, but what you've done since then shows that people can change if they're willing to do the hard work of examining themselves honestly." The acknowledgement of his progress came with continued recognition of the permanent damage his choices had caused, maintaining accountability while celebrating genuine growth and positive change. Our relationship would never return to the innocent trust that had existed before his criminal involvement, but it had evolved into something more mature and realistic about human nature and the possibility of redemption. 5 years after that terrible day at the country club, Marcus had established himself as a reliable construction worker with plans to start his own small contracting business. His financial activities remained transparent and modest, his personal relationships were built on honesty rather than manipulation, and his parenting of a daughter born during his recovery reflected values of integrity and responsibility that had been missing during his criminal period. "Grandpa, Daddy says you saved our whole family by being brave when bad people tried to hurt you," his daughter said during one of our visits, her innocent observation capturing the essential truth about our experience more clearly than any adult analysis could. The comment reminded me that surviving family betrayal and helping someone rebuild their life after serious moral failure was work that extended beyond individual relationships to affect entire families across generations. By refusing to enable Marcus's criminal behavior while remaining open to his genuine redemption, I had helped create possibilities for his daughter to grow up with a father who understood the difference between right and wrong. Standing in Marcus's backyard, watching him push Emma on the swing set he had built with his own hands, I reflected on the journey that had brought us from that terrible confrontation to this moment of simple family happiness. The scars remained from our experience with criminal coercion and family betrayal, but they had healed in ways that strengthened rather than crippled our capacity for love and trust. The criminals who had tried to use our family bonds against us had ultimately failed to destroy what mattered most. They had caused tremendous pain and permanently changed how we understood safety and trust, but they had not prevented us from finding our way back to each other through the hard work of accountability, forgiveness, and genuine change. Elena would have been proud of how we handled the crisis and its aftermath, maintaining love for family while refusing to enable destructive behavior, holding people accountable for their choices while believing in their capacity for redemption. The values she had taught us about integrity and resilience had sustained us through our darkest moments and guided us toward a future built on truth rather than fear. As the sun set behind the trees in Marcus's neighborhood, I felt grateful for the difficult lessons we had learned about the difference between love and manipulation, the importance of boundaries and healthy relationships, and the possibility of genuine redemption for people willing to do the hard work of changing their lives completely. The little girl laughing on the swing set would grow up knowing that her grandfather had stood up to dangerous people to protect what mattered most, and that her father had found the courage to change his life rather than remain trapped by fear and poor choices. The journey from that terrible day to this peaceful evening had required more courage and patience than I had known I possessed, but it had taught me lessons about love and resilience that would sustain me for whatever challenges remain in the years ahead. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.